In the 1980s, I and perhaps you have become aware of the literature on codependency in personal relationships. And as I heard it, reading and learning about relationships and codependency, it was unhealthy to need another person. And that one should be careful of relationships that involved an enmeshment, where you needed your partner, and your partner needed you, and as a result, could get into a variety of control and dependency games in which you had to control your partner to meet your needs, and they had to control you to meet their needs. And that if this was going on in any way, that the person who needed was essentially bad. And so, I've been witness to all kinds of conversations within the codependency movement of, that's codependent, you shouldn't need me for this, in other words. And what I want to do in this video is outline a distinction that I've found personally valuable between constructive codependency and destructive codependency. Now, as part of the framework for this talk, Abraham Maslow's work on the hierarchy of human needs is very relevant. The essence of Abraham Maslow's hypothesis, based on the study of both unhealthy and, more importantly, healthy human beings, is the following: that every human being in history, and every human being to come, has a core need to survive and will work as necessary to survive until that need is met. The next need that every human being will pursue is security in that survival, and that this will be worked on until this need is met. And the third need, which is most relevant to this topic, is the need for love and belonging. And this need will be worked on by each of us as individuals until it is met. And the next being self-esteem, and so on. But this is a very important thing to keep in mind in this topic, that we as human beings need, as pack mammalian species, to feel a sense of belonging, and as human beings, a sense of love. Now, if we understand that we do need that, then the idea of not having any needs for love and belonging is erroneous. So the destructive aspect of codependency is very easy to understand and experience. And it's, for example, I need to go to work to make money, pursue my career. My partner feels lonely being left at home, in the stereotype of in this case, the male-female balance. And so there's a pull from my partner. Don't leave me to work. Don't work, so many hours, etc. I need you. Which would then be met with the counter thing, stop trying to control me, be your own person, I don't have to do what you want me to do, etc., etc. Or I have an interest in talking about politics, my partner does not, my partner feels alone and isolated, and so when I go out to a political event, She doesn't want me to go because she doesn't want to participate, but she also doesn't want to be left behind. And so in this form of codependency, partner A is pulling on partner B not to grow, not to meet their needs, out of fear that this may jeopardize their dependency. Or I may look at my partner who has, several male friends who are very attractive and, clearly have some interest in my partner, and I don't want her to talk with them or meet with them, or, because I'm afraid of losing my source of emotional support. And in a destructive dynamic of codependency, both people end up pulling each other back out of fear of losing something and without regard for the other partner's well-being and development. So this is, of course, very easy to understand. However, seen in the context in which every single human being has a need for love and belonging in a culture that is emotionally illiterate, that is highly traumatized, that has a vast majority of its people. For example, one recent poll in the United States says that more than 70% of Americans feel lonely. Trying to achieve this state in which nobody needs each other from a position of denying these core human needs simply doesn't work. It doesn't work to shame or manipulate a partner who is needy as a result of having unmet needs that every human being has had throughout history because they don't know how to meet their own needs. And so I wanted to talk about this in a situation that I experienced with one of the most healthy, high-growth, and supportive relationships in my life mutually, in which I was very aware at the outset that there was a very strong mutual dependency. And some of the earlier literature might have suggested simply to avoid that relationship. But this is very similar to the idea of, in our culture, in a capitalist framework in which almost all of us need money in one form or another to survive, saying that we're not going to work for a boss because we don't want to be dependent on that boss for money, so we don't work for that boss, and we have even less money, which makes us even more needy, meaning everyone that we come into contact with is viscerally aware that we do not have the means to support ourselves because, in this case, we're trying to avoid a codependent relationship with a boss in which they need us to make money and we need them to make money. And so this is an attempt to bring some useful focus on this area. So this is what I think has made my relationship so constructive for both of us. Now, if we understand that every human being has a need to survive, feel secure in that survival, and have a sense of love and belonging, as well as then moving on to a sense of self-esteem, the key question in any healthy relationship or unhealthy relationship is the relationship facilitating that process? Are both people's survival, security in their survival, sense of love and belonging, and sense of self-esteem increasing? Now, within the goal of a healthy relationships, one of the goals is a balance of power. The more imbalanced the power is in a relationship, the more probable the relationship devolves into dictatorship, slavery, etc., and fear and trauma. Now, this happens in countries when when the laws and the military shift the balance of power away from the people and concentrate it in a sustained imbalance of power that is actually oppressive, where the dictator then is afraid of losing their disproportionate money, their disproportionate powers and freedom. And so they more and more consistently oppress, rewrite laws, enforce military, etc., into a more and more dictatorial relationship between government and people. The exact same thing can happen in any couple relationship. And so one of the metrics that I use is to evaluate the emotional resources, the social resources, the emotional and social skills, the financial skills and the financial resources, which in a capitalist framework equate to survival and security in that survival. Meaning if you're in a capitalist framework and you don't have any money and access to money, and more importantly, you don't have skills that create money, and you're in a relationship with someone that has money, you've got an innate imbalance of power and a built-in dependency for your core needs: survival, security in that survival, love and belonging. Because that goes away, particularly in the chauvinism of our culture, where if you do not have money and cannot take care of yourself, you lose friends. In the United States, in England, and in many Western cultures, your friendships, your need for love and belonging is actually predicated on the status gained from money, which is predicated either on depending on people who have it or on having skills and financial resources. And so when I met my partner, there was an imbalance of finances that was noticeable. And with that came an imbalance of freedom and an imbalance of opportunity and an imbalance in social status. And so the risk is that will deteriorate into a more and more vertical relationship that becomes, of necessity, fear-based, as opposed to based on the individual preferences, uniqueness, and beauty of both individual. And so, but I was in a similar situation going through a deeply traumatic experience in which my social circle had turned their back to protect a status quo power structure that I had depended on socially. And by reenacting childhood abuses, I found myself age regressed and with a number of PTSD symptoms that are best treated with strong social bonds. So I had a very strong emotional need. She had a very strong emotional need. I was very comfortable financially. She was not. And so what I want to suggest are some metrics and techniques for moving towards the ideal of a relationship based on preference, because that is the ideal. That's the goal at the end of this journey, is that both people meet their needs abundantly for survival, security, love and belonging, and self-esteem, moving towards self-actualization. And as a result of that abundance, are able to move into the mature love, which is not the love of lust, not the love of attachment, not the love of desperation, or the survival coping strategy of pleasing and desperation, but the honest and sincere expression of two adults partnering to bring out the best in one another through preference. So this framework was the foremost framework in my mind from the very beginning of the relationship. And so the first thing, my first connection with my partner, who's now my wife, and is she able and willing to move towards bridging the gap? And I learned the answer was yes, because I started as a mentor. And so the relationship began by being of service. And so it was not a sexual relationship. It was not a romantic relationship, quite deliberately, with that in mind. And so she had various survival needs. And what I find is a healthy teacher-student ratio, again, of not fostering dependency, is one in which the teacher or facilitator contributes 15% of the energy, and the student contributes 85% of the energy. I've never seen a better ratio for empowering and building resilience in an individual. And so the relationship began simply by listening carefully to the challenges and stuff that she was dealing with at the time. And we had a dinner. I gave her 5 ideas to respond to various challenges. And I said, if you do these things, let me know how they work. And if you do them and they work well enough that you'd like more input, I'm more than happy to participate and listen to what went on and make a few more suggestions. And so the first couple of weeks in our relationship consisted of her enacting those 5 things, growing in the process, finding them useful, and then coming back to me, letting me know how they'd worked, talking about the growth that had occurred, bringing up new issues, and me responding to those. And so, what I noticed in this process, and this is quite an unusual thing, I don't think I've ever experienced it in any of my interactions anywhere on the planet, was that she was spending a good 4 hours a day building skills, reading things, trying things, growing things, making choices, and would send me the updates. And I would spend about 15, 20 minutes, sometimes an hour a day, responding, supporting, honoring, acknowledging, appreciating, and suggesting possible fine-tunements, always with the suggestion, see how it works, let me know which ones actually work, continue the suggestions that are working, and discard the rest. So at 4 and then up to 6 hours a day of her rapid investment in these areas, I was watching her just take off, in a very vertical and sustained line, where her life was transforming. And as she was transforming, these were not handouts. I didn't give money or anything. These were specific skills, dealing when you have trauma and childhood abuse, inner child meditation, or yoga, or writing a diary, or learning what thoughts and voices are going on, a log of different thoughts. Because when we're abused when we're young, we internalize the abuser as a way to avoid the shock of sustained abuse. And so, what I noticed in, reading through some of the transcripts of her thoughts, etc., was that she would do healthy things And then her internalized abuser, that was a clear picture of what had come at her in childhood, would then attack and criticize her. It's sometimes called the inner critic, for the positive things that she was doing. They would blame her for issues that were not her fault at all, but were actually the negligence or poor skills of people around her. And so one of the important things is to take a stand for the essential self, for the concept that we as children come in innocent. And it is only through neglect, ignorance, or sustained abuse that we get knocked off course, knocked off balance. We all come in knowing what we feel, expressing all our feelings. Babies are beautiful at that. And then in unhealthy cultures, various parts of that get shut down. And when those get shut down traumatically, the trauma is so terrifying for a child, they start shutting themselves down before someone else can shut them down to avoid the shock. It's the same result, but by internalizing the abuser, they have then bypassed the shock. In other words, if they begin to express an opinion in a culture in which their opinions are shamed and humiliated, they will quickly shame and humiliate their own opinions because, while the result is the same, it gives them an illusion of control. They really have no control to be a healthy human being and be accepted because they are not in a healthy environment. And they're in a dependent environment. And when this happens repeatedly in childhood, it is devastating. So I noticed that this was kind of the dynamic. So my role was to be an advocate, to challenge the internal abuser, to back off, to encourage the healthy support, and to create an envelope in which, the core innocence and beauty and symmetry of her being could begin developing the way it would have developed had she had healthy culture and healthy parents. And so this was, the first stage of relationship. And I noticed responding. And with that responding and, having someone safe to push off some of that abuse, she was growing, and with it, her joy and happiness. I began to get a sense of who she was as a being. And based on just how rapidly she was going off, I also began to have a vision of, if she keeps on at this rate, she's going to undo decades of abuse and ignorance and, absurdity in a matter of months or years. And partly because I was touched by just how beautiful the human spirit is, that it takes so much effort, so much intense force of abuse pushing onto a young infant to harm them, and how quickly they cast it off when they're given a chance, that I wanted the honor of being present for that blossoming, for that opening. Now, up until this point, etc., I had not put any weight emotionally of my own on the relationship. That seemed very inappropriate because she's got too much weight from, her past, etc., as it is. So it's all about lifting that weight off. Now, at a certain point in the relationship where, one, I could see her, not her abuse cycle, I could see her, and, just the beauty of her emergence out of that cycle. And two, her load was much less. I gave her the choice that I'll continue as a mentor and spend, 15 minutes a day reading, responding, etc. daily as needed and as long as it's useful, for as long as she wants, that's not going anywhere. But that if she'd like, it can become a more mutual relationship, and if she'd like, could be a romantic relationship. Because logistically speaking, the level of intimacy in the relationship, etc., might make another lover jealous, or vice versa. So if this relationship was going to deepen and accelerate, it had to become mutual. And I did this in a very light way. I didn't say, I'm really attracted to you, which I was. And I'd really like this relationship to be romantic, which seemed like it would be very fulfilling for me. I did a little bit circumspectly. I said, what are your feelings? And, do you have any preference around this? Because, bringing in a romantic element is volatile. It can make the overall relationship more short-lived if it doesn't click well. And we can very happily, continue this relationship of kind of email-based support with audio recordings, etc. And she chose a romantic relationship. And so we had a series of, conversations. And one of the things that I asked her to do was to write down all of the significant things that had happened in her life and how they'd affected her positively and negatively. Because it's very important when there's an imbalance of power, which there was. I was older. I had more social status, and I had more power in a capitalist framework because of my money. And so this is what that means is that I have a much higher responsibility not to push her in an unhealthy direction and to use the influence I have initially that is greater in a way that actually supports her. And so within that framework, I explained what I thought needed to happen for us to move towards symmetry, to move towards the position where both of us would be in a long-term sense of preference. Now, one of the things that I needed for the relationship to work was for us to be able to travel together. Now, at this point, U.S. immigration had blocked her for income reasons from entering the United States on any basis. So, I knew that at the very least it would be a year before she could enter the United States. I also knew, because she did take the time to write out those experiences, that if it was a romantic relationship, it needed to be monogamous. And so she would need a certain flexibility and mobility to travel with me for it to be monogamous, because it would be unhealthy for her for it not to be monogamous. And it wouldn't work for me if, my government is blocking her from coming here and I didn't like the area she lived, in terms of hanging around there. And so she would need to leave her job at a golf course in order to travel with me. And so we spent a fair amount of time discussing the complexity of dual roles. That what I needed in a certain case, when I went into the regression of my trauma, was a mother. When you have two emotionally dissociative parents, as I have, and PTSD, complex PTSD in childhood, abuse, and are going through a trauma in adulthood, which I was going through at that time, there's a lot of age regression. And so there would be times when I was effectively 5 years old emotionally, and I needed a mother that would be there for me for that 5 years old when I was in that regress state. She needed, a teacher and a guide. And, we both needed a lover. And in order to move towards this goal of mutual independence, she would need an income of her own. And so we designed a business that, A, required her to develop business skills. And one of my goals is, and what we're doing as we design a business is she's transferring her financial dependence from the golf course to me. So it's making the imbalance even worse. But it's making the relationship possible. So can that be done in a way that works towards the ultimate goal of being in a healthy, independent relationship? And so the way that we did that was, as an entrepreneur since I was 17 years old, I know the business skills that are needed for someone to be more and more marketable. I'd taken my virtual assistant who was working in the United States, 5 years earlier, and I'd helped him pivot without actually ever meeting him in person, but via Skype. I'd helped him pivot away from working a job in which he was working 40 hours a week on that job, plus another 10 to 15 hours a week for me, to a situation where he was able to return to India, spend a lot more time with his wife, and just work 4 hours a day and make more money than when he'd been working 60 hours a week for two people, because I had trained him on the skills that I knew he was now so good at those skills that he could easily leave me at any point and his income would go up. This is the value of marketable skills. And so one of my conditions for the relationship was that Jen build increasing amounts of marketable skills. Because the more of those she has, the more she moves into a probability field where she can leave me at any point and her income will stay the same or go up. And that was a principle that I kept firmly in mind. Are we interacting in a way that is giving her more and more self-reliant financial independence? And so, she loves art and stuff, so we did a custom greeting card concept. And while I served as bank, as the slush fund to buy all her product until she could learn the marketing skills to market them, she was developing high quality material that she could sell more profitably to someone else once I left the picture. And I always kept that framework in mind. And in fact, that was, again, a very important part of the conversation, was that I want you to be able to leave the relationship, and that every month that goes by, you'll be in a better position than when we met and a better position than you were the month before. So that means things like saving rather than going into debt. The discipline to grow skills rather than slack off. It's the opposite of a sugar daddy, phenomena where, someone atrophies in their financial prowess because they're in a relationship. It had to go the other way. This is a very important PowerPoint within the framework. I also focused on social and life skills that similarly would allow her to exit the relationship in a higher social political status than entering the relationship. Because, again, we're looking at survival, security, love and belonging, and self-esteem. Now, these are all linked to marketable skills that have good social status. And so she hated sales and was very uncomfortable with that. But that was part of the training, to be able to approach a stranger and make a sale, to be able to, she didn't so much want to go into the practicing of being able to secure excellent relationship partners. That seemed to go against her culture. I didn't push that so much, but I didn't ask her or insist that she actually contact other men and learn the dating and communication skills that would allow her to connect with a man who would treat her well and who she could discern and that would have a similarly high social status, because that hurt her feelings when she felt a strong sense of being in love. But I did teach her every step of the way without actually insisting that she contact other dates, etc., to explore that with. This is why this is working. This is what this type of man or this type of man or this type of man would be interested in. Here's the lens of Western views, since you're Filipina. This is the thing that has status, within this kind of relationship or this kind of relationship, and why. And here's how you're doing in that, which it was a little bit odd in some ways because I'm not a typical man. But again, since we have the need to survive, to feel secure, and have a sense of love and belonging, the skills of being able to secure and maintain a healthy, balanced relationship that is self-respecting is a very essential skill in meeting those needs. Now, on the life skill front, all of our traveling and interaction, again, any good teacher has the student do most of the work. And so anything that she could possibly do, I had her do it, which meant she's working hard. Now, in an ideal framework, moving towards equality from my perspective as a teacher, leaving the relationship should be easier than staying in it. That's one way to ensure independence. In other words, if I as an employer am more disciplined and demanding than at least 50% of the employers out there, then if she can survive and grow in that environment with me, she's going to be able to flourish in at least 50% of other workforce environments. This was very important in feeling that this imbalance of power was leveling out. Now, similarly, when we got married, which was the only way to bring her to the United States, was to be married. Go figure. Apparently you can't have friends in poor country. But when we got married, we signed a prenuptial agreement that would ensure that she could be flown to any part in the world upon the dissolution or stay in the United States, and would have enough cash to start a business, to settle herself and have an even better position. So that was always the benchmark. Is what we did together this month making it easier for you to like yourself, to leave me, to be more financially secure, and to be more confident in coping in this world? With that as a benchmark, she grew more than 4,000% in measured life skills and financial skills and relationship skills over a 2-year period. This is a phenomenal accomplishment, by the way. It's there's plenty of people who deteriorate month to month, and there's plenty of people, 10%. You look at a hedge fund, they salivate over a 20% compounding return. 20%. We're talking thousands of percent return. And so every life experience is an opportunity to teach and to grow. Now, this is at odds. The teaching role and the employer role and the lover role and the friend role. These are 4 distinct roles. And then you add in the mother role and the father role, because while I need mothering at times, she needs fathering at times. While I need a friend, to be with me in this way, she needs a friend. While I need, help with this and that, so does she. So the goal is to move the relationship towards independence and balance. That's the point where you can have freedom and maturity. So by delinking these things from love, meaning that, your future is growing and becoming more and more secure, regardless of what happens with our love life, that somewhat, takes the pressure and allows the love to blossom. But there's also another component in that, which is that the lover is the most sensitive and the most vulnerable of all of those roles. And it's not typically good for the lover persona to, have the discipline of a boss or to have the discipline of a teacher. It's great in many situations to have those be distinct, so that your most sensitive feelings don't get snubbed or hurt or tread on by the discipline that is needed for rapid growth in the teaching-student relationship. This is the most delicate, and we had this conversation more than 20 times during the 2-year period. We had it before we consummated the romantic relationship, breakdown in a sense of what the roles would be and how they would fit. We discussed this clash that is inevitable when you have dual roles, and we discussed, what was in her interest and what was in my interest overall in this situation. So, within the lover relationship, I stopped, flirting and having any sexual relationships with anyone else. I even stopped hanging out with masseuses that I really liked. And that honored the lover relationship on that level. And then we just kept the conversations distinct, meaning, living together 24/7, there's a certain blending. But, I would use a whiteboard, on the wall to say, okay, so here's what's happening in this teacher-student relationship. And in this area, you're doing great. But here's an area you're doing a lover pout, and it's getting in the way of your learning. You've got to move towards this parity here. And so, it doesn't matter, what the reason is. This is an area that needs to be developed and grown. And our marriage is in jeopardy. At that point, our future marriage is in jeopardy if we can't move towards symmetry. So, it started with her. And then there's a discipline of priority. Survival comes before romance. Security comes before romance. A sense of love and belonging ties in with romance, and a sense of self-esteem ties strongly to a sense of accomplishment. So, far from pampering her, if she could do something, if she could help fill out an immigration form, she filled it out. If, she could help with the, apartment maintenance, etc., that we secured in the time that she was in Thailand, that we, got a joint apartment, that was her role. And so we had a very clear list of daily routines that were designed to build and strengthen psychologically and financially to move towards this point of parity. And part of my discipline in that was not to let my lust or my self-absorption or my power overshadow that development, because I didn't need any of that. Meaning, I on a very personal level, I didn't need her to make any money. I had enough for both of us. I didn't need her to, develop psychologically in this way, etc. But the responsibility of entering an unbalanced power relationship is to balance the power. That's the number one responsibility. And I was clear that if I was not willing to do that, I had no business being in that relationship. So I put that first as a mature responsibility, as the person guiding the relationship, that my job was to guide it in a direction that would see her in a great place. Now, her whole makeup was to do habits on a daily basis that I had learned in my teens to survive trauma, whether it's doing dream work, doing inner child work, doing yoga, doing journaling. Those came first. She and I didn't get to play until that was done. Then comes work. You want to be a professional artist? Fine, you have to work damn hard at it. It's a difficult industry. So that came second. You want to be in a balanced relationship, contributing something to the relationship. Okay, I'll rent the apartment. Your job is to maintain this, and this, to be an equal partner and to take every learning opportunity. Okay, we're going to go swimming, or I'm going to teach you to swim. And you're going to swim a little bit more and a little bit more until you're confident in the waves. We're going to go surfing. I'm going to teach you to surf. We're going to go, motorcycling. I'm going to teach you to motorcycle so that you can drive us, starting, of course, late at night when no one's around, and, and gradually working to a point where your life skills are going up and up and up and up. And you keep those. You go away with those life skills if at any point you diverge. And I've always had the statistical thing that regardless of how in love two people are, after 100 lovers in my life, some lasting a day, some lasting 4 years, they've ended. That's you don't want to bet if you have 100% ending ratio as a backdrop. You don't want to bet that this is somehow going to be the only one that doesn't end. Instead, you want to make sure that it's an enlivening and strengthening ending if and when it occurs. And just that, also bringing that into the conversation more than a dozen times in those 2 years, and talking about it, talking about relationship theory, talking about power theory, talking about symmetry, talking about useful life skills, talking about her future, talking about her goals, empowering those goals, and seeing that the gifts I gave her were not just, sums of money that get frittered away, but, whether it's a laptop, that and programming and stuff that teaches how to do this and this and this, and giving her the videos from my virtual assistant. I mentioned, the young man that I helped pivot from 65 hours a week, and not having time for his family, into working 20 hours a week and making more money and having more life skills and having a lovely family life and now raising his first son. That movement is investing in tools that will last, photography skills, video editing skills, graphic art skills, navigating this, getting a bank account, knowing how this works, learning about health insurance, getting health insurance so that, if you have a motorcycle accident, you can take care of yourself, learning how to read policies so that you don't get scammed. These are core life skills. And I wasn't actually positive that I would be alive, X numbers of years later, given the extent of the trauma. So it was that much more urgent for me that this tremendous surge in her spirit and her growth did not collapse in the event that I died, in the event that, in the event that my traumatic reactions became unhealthy for her to a degree that that dominated the positives. So this is, I'm saying this, 26 months later after this protocol, and I've never had a relationship that's this great. My PTSD is down 400%. My creative output is up 6,000%. This video is creative output. I've started a nonprofit because learning just how quickly someone can develop when given an opportunity and how mutually beneficial it is, it's such a crime that we are letting so many of our young people squander their talents in suicidal depressions and PTSD, etc. It's a crime and it's a waste. And I really learned that. She was teaching me to be a good teacher. I was teaching her to be a good student. And so 26 months later, with us now happily married for more than 6 months, this protocol has met both of our needs, meaning she is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of percent more likely to survive. She is hundreds of percent more secure in that survival. She went from being a victim of an abusive family through this protocol, building her own income. And again, the temptation in an imbalance of power is to patronize a lover. Oh, you'll be wonderful. That's not kind, in my opinion. My father did that to my mother, and when they divorced, and my mother was 50 years old, having never worked on a day since she was married, she didn't know how to balance her checkbook. She was an emotional mess. She didn't know how to date, and she went through hell for about 5 years because my father's insecurity didn't build her up and support her in being competent as an equal functioning member in our culture, but rather left her in what would be somewhat derogatively called a bimbo state. And I've always been very clear that was cruel, and that I did not want to be involved with that outcome with any woman I was involved with. And while I've had 1 or 2 millionaires that I've dated, in which they had more money than me, most of the people that I've spent time with, there's been that money imbalance. And I've always wanted to help, not through pampering and giving money, but through encouraging and building life skills, that could move into a more and more equal relationship. Now, this process continues. And so, one of the distinctions I also kept because, my goal is for her to have as much savings as possible and as much skills as possible, leading to freer and freer thought. When you need someone financially, you cannot stop yourself from unconsciously thinking in a way that's about pleasing as opposed to who you are as a person. And so there's only one way out of that, and that is to, have your own independence in practical terms. So that carries on in things like, when she recently opened a bank account in the United States, it's her account. And in the, I used to have a house cleaner in the United States. It's very good for our relationship to prioritize being around each other the most. And that's, again, something that, since I'm a fussy client, having her learn, personal assistance type skills and making the same rate as I was paying, my house cleaner or assistant, means that it's conditioning to go and do that for somebody else at any point. And so that's basically been the standard. And I'm very aware of the whether it's feminists or political correctness, how politically incorrect a lot of this is. And that's one of the reasons I'm making this video, is I don't want you to destroy an otherwise profound and exceptional relationship for political correctness. Every context is different, obviously. When I'm dating a millionaire, this is not the focus of the relationship. But there can be very healthy codependent relationships. And the key around the social level, I'm, first of all, having, moved away from an abusive family as a victim, she is now, from a power point of view, with a lot to teach her family, who's, of course, still in the Philippines, now becoming the head of her family. So this is broadening her social status as well as her sense of love and belonging. She now has younger siblings looking up to her. And that also is part of completing the teaching. I'm encouraging her to do with her siblings what I did with her. By just look at what I did with you in this stage. I didn't give you money. I asked you to work hard. You developed a routine and you developed a discipline. You learned these skills. These skills have helped you in this way. Those are the same skills that are going to help your siblings. Those are the same skills that are going to help your father. And so engage as a teacher and a mentor and a leader in your family. So this also balances out the power, because it's not healthy to only engage as a student and only engage in the lower end of the power dynamic. If you're going to do that, because it's, if you need to learn things, you don't engage as a teacher. But she's at a point where, having engaged effectively as a student, beyond my wildest dreams, she can now deepen what she's learned by now engaging as a teacher for her family and some of her relatives and friends. And since the Philippines is a completely crappy economy, with brilliant minds going to rot for 50 cents an hour, providing opportunities through the nonprofit where these individuals can make a difference, where their quality of life can go up, where their skills are going up, where they have hope, in seeing, whether it's their child, their older sister, etc., connecting in a healthy way in the larger world, is profoundly healthy and builds hope in the people touched by that engagement. And so, I now see, the pleasure of watching her generosity and mentoring skills as she induces that. And this is my view of a healthy design, meaning if a teaching or an in-service relationship is done well, then it can be replicated at scale and create win-win and abundance for all concerned. Now, thank heavens, in this sense, that there's such an economic gap, because, I'm just a guy with one small business. I fund my own nonprofit, and so I don't have unlimited resources. But my goal as we continue the relationship is that she touch more and more people's lives positively, that as she does so, her social status increases. With that, her power increases, so that she can either stay in the United States if at some point we separate, or can return as a hero to her country and as a leader with enough resources, etc., to keep that momentum going. So stuff that builds that. I've actively cultivated opportunities for life skills, whether it's, learning to kayak, learning to drive, establishing paperwork, getting her passport, learning this skill, traveling to different countries, dabbling in different languages, learning this skill, learning this skill. But the biggest part of that is the daily routine. And as she's done a lot of the heavy work, meaning in the early part of our relationship, like most of her culture, she was working 10 hours a day as a disciplined artist. As long as she was in the Philippines, that would be necessary to survive. In the US, with her skills, she doesn't need to work 10 hours a day to survive. She can work 4 hours a day and generate more money and savings and stuff than in the Philippines. And that's actually something I personally believe in. I work 2 to 4 hours a day for money 6 months of the year, and then the other 6 months of the year I'm involved with more philanthropic projects that don't make any money, and I don't need them to, because through my business I've been able to maintain my lifestyle, with the 2 to 4 hours a day, 6 months of the year, through more than 1,000 choices since I was 17, with that goal in mind, to free up more and more of my time to do important things as opposed to just chase a buck. So in conclusion, 26 months in, I have all the healing from her mothering that isn't going away. I've been able to explore my inner feminine in a way that I've never been able to explore with a Western woman. I've been able to discover the joy of teaching, being in service, and mentoring, something I've not done to that extent. I find that there's a beautiful ripple effect where, for example, when I bought her an easel and all kinds of art supplies so that she could feel at home in my house when she moved to the US, I'm now using that easel more than she is to paint. So, the house is filled with our paintings. So I'm growing as an artist. We write poems back and forth. So we're both growing as a poet. We give gifts back and forth. So we're both growing as lovers. And, I've never had such a nice house cleaner. She's never had so much money. And those roles are distinct. We spend an average of 2 hours a day processing emotions, nuances, learning. We read each other's diary and get a sense of what it's like to be each other in each other's world. We, deal with this balance between wanting to be the best partner for each other and wanting to be our own selves, and where those diverge. She listens to books. I have whole inspirations that have come as a result of the relationship, the nonprofit being one of them. She provides helpful resources for the nonprofit by knowing people that are looking for a sense of meaning and future, and that don't have that sense of meaning and future in her, in their family or their, in that area, the Philippines, etc., and that then can serve others, serve the larger world, and with the media for the nonprofit, the video editing that she's learned, is now then transferring to some of some of her friends or relatives, which makes media more possible. And it's just opened up a doorway for me where, we may in the next 10 years, we have futures. That's another thing that we explore. We have a whole whiteboard, on the fridge. Futures for us, futures for Jen, futures for me, where they overlap. Anytime we have an idea, we write it down, and so many of those have been checked off. And so it's, I just feel an immense gratitude, an immense sense of celebration of the human spirit, that two broken peoples could connect in a state of conscious dependency, where we both needed each other emotionally, we both needed each other physically, we both needed each other psychologically, we both needed skills and experiences the other, could introduce. The marriage that, gives her access to the United States economy also gives me access to staying, long periods in the Philippines, where I'm much happier. I love the Philippines as a culture, and, I like swimming and snorkeling and stuff like that. It's so much more enjoyable for me. I am much happier when I'm in the Philippines than when I'm in the United States. And so it's opening doorways. The nonprofit may move a center over there simply because, I don't have $5 million to start a micro community within the U.S. And it's much harder with the U.S. personality temperament, in which so much of United States culture is defined by being your own person and nobody's going to tell me what to do. You notice that that's the opposite of this growth point. It's been her femininity and gratitude and grace for being shown what to do that has been such a huge doorway to so much of this growth that wouldn't have worked if her basic attitude was, nobody's going to tell me what to do. Okay, well, then just carry on doing whatever you're doing. That's not working very well. So the possibility to replicate and expand this pattern, and that's, as a designer, that's what I think of, about. And I'd also say that while this sounds incredibly cerebral, and it is intentionally so, I've been very clear that, if two people are coming from abusive parental situations, you don't do what feels natural. What feels natural is reenacting the abuse. You do the opposite. If in doubt, our relationship has not been sexual, simply because it's been very important to me to err on the side of this being about who you are and having a chance to get your bearings when you're growing at 4,000% in different skills. You just take the baseline. If you knew how to, type 10% at the beginning, and then you know how to type 10 times better, well, that's, 1,000% growth in typing. And, you know how to swim 20%, and then now it's 300% better. That's 300% growth. And you didn't know how to drive a motorcycle. When you build all these skills up, and they're enduring skills, meaning they'll be with you for the rest of your life, it is a discipline, and it is a cerebral process. However, I've studied love and bonding and feminine energy because of its deficit in my family and in my culture. And the goal is to honor the opposite. So the byproduct of all this thought and structure, etc., is that she's now independent. I have complete confidence in her skills, in her resources, in her habits, in her disciplines, that she can go wherever she wants to go. So there's no pressure on me. There's no feeling like, what have I done to this, young person or whatever. I'd like to leave, but I don't want to think of her life being. No, there's none of that. There's a sense of enormous freedom. And that enormous freedom gives possibility to dream and simultaneously talk candid. Like if we're still together, I think in 4 or 5 years, this might be a really fun thing for us to do. And, if we're still together in 2 years, it's probably about the time when you should get your own car. In the meanwhile, use my electric motorcycle and let's, work on your driver's license and stuff like this. It's fun to learn. It's fun to teach. But coming back to this sense of this balance between structure and spontaneity, between romance and, all of this lineal thinking, this is the romance we have today. We a typical day, we wake up and we cuddle as long as we want to. And then I have a creative impulse, like one of these videos, and I get up and make the video. She does her yoga, her inner child work, her diary, and starts working on some of her goals. When I'm done with my creative work, as I mentioned, I do an average of 2 to 4 hours a day of professional work as a landscape contractor. And so if we need a little bit of space, that's a good time. That's our one time to take a little space, so I can go off and just work with the crew. But one of my great pleasures, since she loves gardening and loves art, and she's made beautiful fairy gardens in the house. The house is filled with her paintings and cards and poems, and she's developed parts of the garden as ways to teach her. This is how you do irrigation. This is how you do lighting. She did the lighting system. We did a giant painting for one of the walls and hung it. So the house, I've lived here for 15 years. It has, it's 300% more enjoyable to live in my house because she's here and what she's done with it. And she's learned stuff, be it electrical or wiring, every single step of the way. That's hers for a lifetime. So the house is 3 times nicer. So then if, just on the spur of the moment, I don't need her, but I know that every time she comes to the job site, she's going to learn. She was a little bit, petite and disembodied, as many traumatized people are. And so she comes into her body and her feelings more, with if she picks up a pick or, shovel and helps with planting or something. But more importantly, another set of skills. And one of my dreams, and again, it's just like they're fun futures, if it comes to that, is you may reach a point where I've never had a good foreman. I've always had to supervise my crew to get the results I want. But she's so detail-oriented. She may, reach a point at this rate, in another 2 years, where she can take over that business so that I can focus fully on the nonprofit, which would be a whole nother level of esteem, accomplishment, skills, and empowerment that would make me very proud to see that, but also is useful. It's this win-win constantly. And so the crew like her, the customers love her. In the Philippine culture, Americans have higher status because that's one of the sad side effects of a conquering dynamic. So the U.S. has, military bases in the Philippines, etc. And so there's not a fully equal relationship. Duterte is balancing that out a little bit, but that's an unhealthy residue of an oppressive dynamic between two countries. And so, when Jen first came, she was shy, talking with some of my clients. That's rapidly dissolving. And so there's so many levels at which, all these illusionary veils And they are illusions. We make them up as cultures and say this is more important if you do that, or if you write a book, you're an important person. If you didn't finish high school, you're not. We just make up this bullshit, and then we dump it on people. And it's important to unveil that and peel it away and realize no, we're just human beings, and if we're Americans, we're almost by definition emotionally illiterate, trauma illiterate. In dysfunctional relationships, coping mechanisms, you name it, mentally, emotionally sick, and we need help. And it's also, so delightful to realize that, a young woman without any of this formal training, etc., has been more helpful to me than $150,000 in therapy. Go figure. But with an exit strategy that is intended to do one thing and one thing only, to see that, Jen continues to grow and has her freedom in any way that she wants that, and that everything that we do builds that confidence and resilience, it's a wonderful future for me to look forward to. Whatever it is, I get to see her grow. And that inspires me to grow, to, she's such an amazing person. I want to be a better person for her. And so that's been the recipe that I use, and it boils down to what I began with. All human beings do need a sense of love and belonging, a sense of survival and security, a sense of self-esteem. The way to honor that very visceral and real need and stay in the mature love of what is going to make you happy. The kind of love where if your partner would be happier with another man, you want that for them. Or if they'd be happier doing something, you want that for them. And you not only want that, you want them to know the skill and the technique of creating and sustaining that as an abundance for themselves. To reach that is not by denying our innate needs to feel survival, security, love, and belonging, but rather partnering together so that every month, every day, every year we're together, we both, you and your partner, have more of that abundance, have more access to people, meaning because of the beautiful well-being that she's helped me create, it's now 10 times easier for me to connect with other people when and if I want to. So I have much less of a sense of scarcity, which gives me then the strength and the abundance to put her happiness first. Because of, that the ways that she's learned by being actually healthy, I feel more confident and secure and safe in my finances today than I did before I met her. But so does she, by thousands of %. And, because, and then there's other things like, when I'm in a regressed traumatized state, cuddling with a dog is really healing for my inner 5-year-old. But being alone and traveling as much as I do, I could never have a dog. Well, we now have a dog. And when I can't care for it, Jen cares for it and vice versa. And so it adds to our abundance. And if Jen is in her needy place, when I'm busy doing something creative, she has a dog. So the resources grow. And that's really the seed. And the community that we're looking to build is one where that growth is exponentially amplified. Because when you have a community that's based on the same principle that every month, every person in the community is building their survival and the security of their survival, is building their sense of love and belonging and their sense of self-esteem, is working towards self-actualization. You are surrounded by strength, resources, talent, stimulation, growth, and the people who are drawn to a community that is about being of service in a nonprofit are phenomenally wonderful people who become even more phenomenally wonderful by participating in the community, creating an exponential sense of abundance that then moves towards a place where, Jen could say, I need 3 days to myself. And rather than me saying, where do I turn? I was counting on doing this with you, and I don't enjoy doing this without you. And so I don't want you to go and do that. To saying, no, I've got this person and this person and this person, and it doesn't have, do the 3 days. And you want to study this, even though I need you for this, well, I'll hire someone else for that, or I'll work with this. And so it creates more abundance. And then some of that savings can go into a community level so that we can respond as a community to some of these, some of the scarcity that can come up if someone has a medical emergency or someone dies, that there's an abundance of reserves built into that process of saving emotionally, building reserves, building skills. When Jen does her inner child work every single day, not only, do wounds heal so that she's less and less fragile, but she has reserves to give to others that she wouldn't have if she didn't invest in that ritual. In the yoga and the work, she's got physical reserves that she builds in the kayaking and muscles and stuff, so that there's more and more resilience and strength, which leads to that ultimate dream, that pinnacle of humanity, where all our needs are met and then some. And the fear and the trauma of survival recedes. And it's more and more about our individual light and spirit, saying, what satisfies my soul to do today? And when we're building this framework on a paradigm of investing 4 hours a day for money and a lifestyle that supports that, we've got an abundance of time, something that almost no one in America has. Something I've been working on developing that science for the last 15 years until I have an abundance of time. I just don't have any Americans who have abundance of time to connect with that. But creating that in this community is another level. And so I'm sharing this as part of that abundance with you, so that you have a sense of the recipe that I've found useful in turning imbalances of power to balance, scarcity into abundance, desperation and trauma into healing, balance of power, growth and development, and moving closer and closer to the ultimate dream, where the majority of our time, money, thoughts, and energy is about fulfilling the essence of who we are as a soul, as a spirit, as a consciousness, that we came in wanting and capable of doing certain kinds of work, be it dance, be it ritual, be it art, be it service, and then found ourselves in this treadmill created in this absurd dominant paradigm of capitalism, in which bits of paper created by people suddenly get elevated to be more important than the people who created them. We'd love to help you with your health, but it's too expensive. We'd love to spend time with you, but time is money. It's very, very bizarre what we've done as a culture. And so reclaiming our humanity. And I wish the same for you.